In the sweltering summer of 1854, as the sun dipped low over the endless rows of cotton in a remote Georgia county, a shadow moved through the underbrush. It was Ilara, a woman bound to the soil she tilled, her hands stained not just with earth, but with the forbidden knowledge of roots and leaves that no overseer dared acknowledge. Whispers among the enslaved spoke of her as a healer, one who could coax life from the wild where death lurked. But that evening, as cholera's grip tightened on the plantation, Ilara vanished into the night, carrying a satchel of herbs that would defy the plague and seal her fate in silence. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the bell. Here we unearth secrets buried by official history and give voice to what was silenced. The air hung heavy with the scent of decay that July, when the first fevered cries echoed across the sprawling fields of Willow Bend Plantation. Owned by Elias Hawthorne, a man whose wealth was built on the unyielding labor of over 500 souls, the estate sprawled like a forgotten kingdom amid the red clay hills. Hawthorne's ancestors had claimed the land generations earlier, their fortunes woven from the threads of human endurance. But beneath the veneer of southern gentility lay a darker tapestry, a system that demanded not just bodies, but obedience in every breath. Ilara had arrived at Willow Bend as a girl, sold from a coastal farm where her mother had first taught her the ways of the wild. Tall and resolute, with eyes that held the depth of ancient rivers, she moved through her days with a quiet defiance. The overseers saw her as just another field hand, her bent back blending into the chorus of suffering. Yet in the dim hours after sunset, when the lanterns flickered low in the quarters, Ilara became something more, a guardian of secrets passed down through bloodlines severed by chains. Cholera struck without mercy, a spectre born from contaminated wells, and the desperation of crowded cabins. It began with a child, little Josiah, whose small frame twisted in agony by the firefly-lit paths. His mother, Mira, rocked him through the night, her prayers mingling with the moans of the afflicted. By dawn, the sickness had claimed him, and the fear spread faster than the fever. Overseers barked orders to isolate the ill, but isolation meant abandonment in the heat, where vultures circled early. Hawthorne, from his shaded veranda, dispatched the plantation doctor, a weary man named Harlan, who prescribed little more than laudanum and prayers. "God's will," he muttered, as if divine decree excused the mounting graves. But Ilara watched. She had seen cholera before, in whispers from elders who spoke of remedies hidden in the earth's embrace. One evening, as Mira wailed over her son's fresh mound, Ilara approached, her voice a soft murmur against the wind. "There's a way," she said, glancing toward the tree line where moonlight pierced the leaves. Mira hesitated, knowing the risks. Any act deemed witchcraft could bring the whip or worse. Yet desperation overrode fear. That night Ilara slipped away, returning with a poultice of leaves and roots, steeped in a brew that smelled of earth and forgotten rains. Word spread like roots through soil. The first to drink from Ilara's vessel was old Silas, a bent elder whose cough had turned to retching. By morning his color returned, the cramps easing as if the poison had been drawn out. Mira tried it next, then her kin. Skeptical at first, the afflicted began to line the shadows near Ilara's cabin, their pleas a hushed tide. She worked tirelessly, foraging under cover of darkness for the key herb, a wild sassafras variant, twisted with other botanicals that her forebears had cultivated in secret gardens back on distant shores. It was illegal, not by law, but by the unspoken code of the plantation. Knowledge that empowered the enslaved threatened the master's control. To heal without permission was to challenge the very order of subjugation. As the days blurred into a haze of suffering, Ilara's remedy became a quiet revolution. Over 100 souls, then 2, sipped from her gourds, their bodies rallying against the onslaught. The overseers noticed the shift. The graves dug fewer, the work songs resuming with fragile strength. Rumors swirled in the big house. Witchcraft, they hissed, or some devil's bargain. Hawthorne summoned Harlan, who examined the survivors with growing unease. "Impossible," the doctor grumbled, tasting a sample and spitting it into the dust. But the evidence mounted. The cholera, which had ravaged neighboring farms, faltered at Willow Bend's edges, yet triumph was fleeting. Ilara's work drew eyes that lingered too long. One night, as she prepared another batch by the light of a hidden flame, a shadow fell across her door. It was not an overseer, but Hawthorne himself, his face etched with the strain of a man watching his empire teeter. "What sorcery is this?" he demanded, his voice low to avoid alarming the house. Ilara met his gaze steadily, the satchel clutched to her chest. She spoke of no spells, only the land's own gifts, passed from those who knew its heart. But in his eyes flickered something darker, fear, perhaps, or the greed of possession. He ordered her to share the recipe, to brew under supervision for the plantation's sake. Ilara refused, her silence a wall built from generations of guarded wisdom. The tension coiled like storm clouds. Whispers among the enslaved turned to warnings. Ilara's knowledge was a double-edged blade, one that could save but also condemn. Families huddled in the quarters, sharing stories of healers from before, women who vanished after defying the pact of silence that bound the fields. Hawthorne's wife, Lydia, a frail figure in lace who rarely ventured beyond the parlor, overheard the talk. Her diaries, later found tucked in attic beams, hint at her own unease. "The colored woman's herbs mock our physicians. What if they work? What then of our place?" As the outbreak waned, with nearly 500 spared from the grave, the plantation exhaled a collective breath. But Ilara's victory was no celebration. She withdrew deeper into the shadows, her gatherings ceasing as abruptly as they began. The recipe, that elixir of resilience, slipped from hands like mist through fingers. Overseers patrolled closer, and the big house's ledgers noted only the cholera's toll, omitting the healer who bent its arc. Decades passed, the fields yielding cotton, while memories faded into the clay. Willow Bend changed hands after the war, its stories diluted in Reconstruction's haste. Official records from the county clerk's office spoke of a miraculous abatement, crediting prayer vigils and quarantine. No mention of Ilara, whose name became a ghost in oral tales passed among descendants. It was not until 1923, when a great-niece unearthed a charred fragment of journal in the ruins of a slave cabin, that the first threads unraveled. The page, brittle and ink-faded, described the brew in coded verse, the twisted root of shadowed oak, with fever-fuse embrace, boiled under moon to chase the waste. That discovery lingered in family lore, a seed of persistence amid forgetting. But the full recipe, it vanished, buried perhaps with Ilara herself, whose own end came quietly in the years following, a fever, the ledgers claimed, though whispers said otherwise. The plantation's silence was complicit, a veil drawn by those who profited from erasure. Elites like the Hawthornes ensured such acts of agency remained footnotes, if noted at all. Communities nearby spoke in hushed tones of the healer who saved them, yet fear of reprisal kept the truth dormant. Today, in the quiet hollows of that Georgia county, descendants trace their lines back to Willow Bend, piecing together fragments from oral histories and overlooked archives. Historians pore over tribunal files from post-war claims, where faint echoes of the outbreak surface, not as triumph, but as a reminder of what was stolen. Ilara's story endures not in grand monuments, but in the resilient blood of those she touched, a testament to the forbidden knowledge that outlasted chains. The herb's secret, like so many silenced truths, waits for revelation, urging us to listen to the land's unspoken testimony. The weeks following the cholera's retreat brought an uneasy calm to Willow Bend. where the air still carried the faint, acrid tang of hastily dug graves, now overgrown with weeds. The fields, once dotted with the prone forms of the stricken, hummed again with the rhythm of hoes striking earth, but the songs that rose from the quarters were subdued, laced with a caution that spoke of debts unpaid and eyes ever watchful. Ilara moved among her people like a spectre, her steps measured, her satchel now hidden beneath loose floorboards in her cabin. The brew that had pulled so many from the brink was no longer shared openly. Instead, it became a whispered exchange, passed in glances during the long marches to the cotton rows. Hawthorne's confrontation lingered in the shadows of every interaction. From his veranda, he observed the plantation with a gaze sharpened by suspicion, his ledgers now filled not just with yields and rations, but with cryptic notes on unusual recoveries. He had demanded the recipe again in private audiences, his voice a low rumble that echoed the thunder of approaching storms. Ilara's refusal was not born of insolence, but of a deeper wisdom, one forged in the stories her mother had murmured under starlit skies, tales of healers whose knowledge became chains when seized by those who ruled. "The land gives to those who listen," she had replied once, her words a veil over the truth. Hawthorne, unaccustomed to defiance from the quarters, retreated not in defeat, but in calculation, enlisting Harlan to probe the survivors with questions disguised as concern. The doctor's inquiries wove through the cabins like threads in a noose. He arrived at dawn with his black bag, tasting tisanes from wary hands and scribbling observations that painted Ilara's work as mere coincidence. Folk remedies, he dismissed in reports to Hawthorne, yet his own unease betrayed him. In a letter later discovered among his effects, he confessed to a colleague, "There's potency here beyond our pharmacopoeia, drawn from roots that mock our elixirs." But such admissions were private, buried in the silence that elites cultivated to preserve their authority. Publicly, Harlan credited the abatement to improved sanitation, dug latrines and boiled water, erasing the human agency that had truly turned the tide. The plantation's records, meticulously kept by a clerk beholden to Hawthorne, reflected this narrative, omitting Ilara's name as if she were a fleeting dream. Among the enslaved, the victory was bittersweet, a fragile shield against the system's unrelenting grind. Families like Mira's, who had lost Josiah but spared her other children, gathered in the hush of twilight to express gratitude through shared labor. Extra portions of cornbread slipped under doors, songs coded with her praise, yet fear coiled beneath the relief. Overseers, those iron-fisted enforcers with whips coiled at their belts, patrolled with renewed vigor, their eyes lingering on Ilara as she tended the herb patches disguised amid the kitchen garden. One evening, as she harvested under the guise of gathering greens for the big house, a young hand named Theo approached, his voice trembling. "They say the master wants your secret for his own kin up north. What if he takes it by force?" Ilara's response was a steady gaze, her hands pausing over the soil. Some things are not taken, they are given or they fade. Rumors of a pact began to stir, not among the fields, but in the dim parlors of neighboring estates. Hawthorne, ever the patriarch of his circle, hosted gatherings where brandy flowed and voices lowered over tales of the outbreak. "A colored woman's folly saved my hands," he admitted once. His tone laced with reluctant awe, but quickly pivoted to warnings of unrest. Such knowledge breeds ideas above their station. Lydia, his wife, withdrew further into her seclusion, her diaries swelling with fragmented thoughts, entries on dreams of poisoned wells and women with eyes like storm clouds. She confided in a cousin's letter, smuggled away after her death, of overhearing Ilara's chants, soft incantations that blurred the line between medicine and mysticism. "It frightens me, this power in the shadows," she wrote, revealing the cracks in the facade of southern refinement. where women's roles were confined, yet their fears unbound. As autumn deepened, the first signs of erasure emerged. Ilara's gatherings dwindled. A raid on her cabin yielded only wilted leaves, the true ingredients scattered or committed to memory. She taught fragments to trusted kin, Mira's daughter, who memorized the boil times by the moon's phases, and Silas's grandson, who learned the foraging paths through riddles. But the full recipe, that intricate dance of sassafras twisted with hidden ferns and barks from sacred groves, remained locked within her. Hawthorne's pressure mounted subtly, rations shortened for her family, tasks doubled, whispers of sale to distant markets. In response, Ilara vanished more often into the woods, returning with satchels that lightened the fevers of the ailing but never revealed their core. The community's complicity weighed heavy, a silence born not of betrayal but survival. Elders like Silas counseled caution, recounting oral histories of similar healers from Carolina plantations, women whose remedies sparked envy and vanished amid accidents. "The master's pact is with the law," Silas murmured one night by the fire, "and the law forgets us twice over." Descendants would later piece these warnings from faded quilts embroidered with symbols, twisted roots sewn in secret threads, artifacts that survived the wars and migrations, carrying the weight of unspoken resilience. By winter's chill, the recipe's vanishing felt inevitable, a deliberate fading into the mist. Ilara fell ill herself, her body weakened by ceaseless toil and the poison of vigilance. Whispers claimed it was no natural fever, but a draught slipped into her water, administered by hands loyal to Hawthorne's will. She lingered in her cabin, refusing Harlan's visits. Her final words to Mira, a cryptic verse, "Guard the shadow oak, where the feverfew sleeps under frost." As she slipped away, the plantation mourned in quiet vigils, but the big house remained still, its silence a testament to the erasure that defined their world. Decades later, in the 1920s, when sharecroppers tilled the same red clay, fragments resurfaced in unexpected ways. A well-digger unearthed a small cache of dried herbs in a forgotten pit, their scent evoking ghosts of plagues past. County archives, yellowed and neglected, held claims from former enslaved seeking reparations, mentioning the healer's brew in passing, dismissed by clerks as superstition. These glimmers pierced the veil of forgetting, reminding us how truths like Ilara's endure not in proclamations, but in the persistent dig of those who refuse to let the soil keep its secrets. The recipe's loss was no accident. It was the cost of agency in a system designed to devour it, leaving only echoes for the patient to reclaim. The frost of that winter clung to Willow Bend like a shroud, blanketing the fields in a deceptive peace that masked the fractures beneath. Ilara's passing rippled through the quarters, not as a thunderclap, but as a slow seep of grief, seeping into the cracks of daily endurance. Her cabin stood empty, its door unlatched, swaying in the chill winds that carried echoes of her chants. Mira, who had become her closest confidant, took to visiting the site under the cover of pre-dawn hours, tracing the floorboards where the satchel had once been concealed. No traces remained. The herbs had been dispersed or destroyed in the quiet hours after her death, leaving only the faint outline of resilience etched in the memories of those she had touched. Hawthorne's response was measured, a calculated veil over the unease that gnawed at him. He ordered the cabin razed, claiming it a hazard in the post-plague disarray, but whispers among the hands suggested otherwise, a deliberate erasure to bury the source of his discomfort. The structure crumbled under axes wielded by reluctant laborers, its timbers hauled to the sawmill, where they were repurposed into fences that hemmed in the very fields Ilara had helped sustain. In the big house, Lydia Hawthorne penned frantic entries in her diary, her script erratic. The woman's shadow lingers, the children wake crying of twisted roots in their dreams. She never confronted her husband directly, bound by the fragile decorum of her station, but her letters to distant kin betrayed a growing dread, fragments that would surface years later in a trunk of forgotten correspondence. The plantation's rhythm resumed, but altered, as if the cholera had carved hollows in the collective spirit. Overseers drove the hands harder, their commands sharper to reclaim the lost weeks of labor, yet the songs that rose from the rows carried new undercurrents, verses laced with veiled tributes to the healer, disguised as laments for lost kin. Silas, the elder whose life Ilara had first spared, became a quiet archivist of her legacy, murmuring the fragments she had shared to a small circle around the evening fires. "The shadow oak guards the twist," he would say, his voice a rasp against the crackling flames, teaching the boil under frost and the embrace of feverfew without naming the full weave. These oral threads, fragile as spider silk, wove through families, surviving the relentless churn of births, sales, and separations that defined their world. Yet the silence imposed from above was insidious, a complicity woven into the fabric of the system. Hawthorne consulted with local elites in smoke-filled parlors, men whose own plantations bordered Willow Bend and shared the unspoken pact of control. "Such talents must be contained," one advised, a lawyer with ink-stained fingers who drafted deeds and wills that perpetuated the chains. They spoke not of Ilara by name, but of the incident, framing her remedies as a threat to order, a spark that could ignite broader unrest. Official county records submitted that spring glossed over the outbreak's toll, attributing the low mortality to providential intervention and diligent management. No mention of the forbidden brew, no acknowledgement of the 500 souls whose survival owed nothing to divine whim or elite benevolence. This erasure was no oversight. It was policy, a deliberate archiving that favored the ledger's cold arithmetic over human defiance. As spring thawed the ground, hints of the recipe's vanishing deepened into a profound loss. Mira's daughter, young Lena, attempted to recreate the elixir when a seasonal ague swept the quarters, blending what she recalled with wild guesswork. Her efforts eased a few fevers, but faltered against the deeper chills, the missing elements, a rare bark from the river's hidden bends, infused with sassafras under specific stars, proving elusive. Frustration turned to sorrow in the women's circles, where stories of Ilara evolved into cautionary parables. The healer who gave everything, only to have her gift dissolved into the soil. They took her body, but the knowledge. They couldn't touch what lived in us, Mira would whisper, yet the doubt lingered, a melancholy undercurrent that spoke of how power not only bound but unmade. Hawthorne's own family bore the subtle scars of the episode. His son, a lanky boy of 12, who had watched the outbreak from the nursery windows, fell into fits of melancholy, sketching roots and leaves in the margins of his primers. Lydia attributed it to the lingering miasma, but in her private reflections, she wondered if the air carried Ilara's unspoken curse, a reminder that the land harbored forces beyond their grasp. The master himself grew reclusive, his veranda vigils extending into dusk, eyes scanning the tree lines as if expecting the healer to emerge from the mist. Rumors among the house staff hinted at his failed attempts to procure similar remedies from traveling peddlers, offers rebuffed with prices that bespoke the knowledge's rarity. In this isolation, the pact of silence solidified. To admit Ilara's triumph would unravel the myth of invincibility that sustained their world. Decades would cloak these tensions in dust, but the seeds of revelation stirred even then. A young field hand, Theo, who had warned Ilara of the master's greed, etched symbols into a fence post before fleeing north during a rare lapse in patrols. Those marks, twisted lines evoking roots and moons, endured the weathering, rediscovered in the 1880s by sharecroppers who puzzled over their meaning. Oral tales migrated with families, carried on the Underground Railroad's echoes and woven into gospel songs that masked their origins. The recipe's absence became a metaphor for broader erasures. The way plantations like Willow Bend buried not just bodies, but the very acts of survival that defied their cruelty. In the quiet aftermath, the community's resilience flickered like embers in ash. Families formed tighter bonds, sharing not just labor, but the fragments of hope Ilara had sown. Yet the weight of forgetting pressed heavy, a tragic hush that elites enforced through law and lore. Hawthorne's ledgers, passed to heirs after his death in 1862, omitted the healer's role entirely, crediting only the fortitude of the estate. This denial extended to the war's upheavals, where Willow Bend's fields lay fallow, its secrets dormant amid the march of armies. Today, as descendants sift through these layered silences, the story of Ilara's vanishing recipe unmasks the machinery of historical amnesia. Tribunal files from Reconstruction-era claims, yellowed in state basements, reference herbal interventions dismissed as folklore by biased clerks. Osadas unearthed in old wells, perhaps not from cholera, but from the unrecorded punishments that followed, hint at the human cost of such guarded knowledge. The truth emerges piecemeal, a persistent dig against the soil of denial, reminding us that what was stolen can be reclaimed through the voices that refuse to break. Now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're hearing this story. I want to know how far these silenced reports reach. The spring of 1855 unfurled over Willow Bend like a reluctant confession, the red clay softening under rains that washed away the last traces of winter's frost, but could not cleanse the lingering pall of loss. The fields, revived by the hands that Ilara had helped preserve, burst forth with cotton buds that promised another harvest, yet the plantation's pulse beat unevenly, shadowed by the void her absence had carved. Mira moved through her days with a heaviness in her steps, her eyes often drifting to the spot where Ilara's cabin had stood, a barren patch, now seeded with corn, as if the earth itself conspired to overwrite the healer's footprint. In the quiet hours, Mira would pause amid the rows, her hoe idle, whispering fragments of the remedy to the wind, the twist of sassafras under moonlight, the subtle infusion of feverfew gathered at dawn, but without Ilara's guiding hand, the words felt like echoes in an empty vessel, incomplete and fading. Hawthorne's grip on the estate tightened in the wake of her death, his commands laced with an urgency that bordered on paranoia. He expanded the patrols, enlisting more overseers from neighboring farms, men with scarred knuckles and eyes hardened by the trade, who scoured the quarters for any sign of superstitious gatherings. One such raid came at midnight, lanterns swinging like pendulums of judgment, turning up a hidden gourd etched with root symbols in Mira's possession. She stood firm, claiming it a simple water vessel, but the overseer shattered it against a post, his laughter a brittle mask over the fear that Ilara's legacy might still stir. Hawthorne, informed at first light, did not punish outright. Instead, he isolated Mira's family, assigning them to the remotest fields where isolation bred suspicion. "No more shadows," he decreed in a rare address to the hands, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had glimpsed the fragility of his dominion. In the big house, Lydia Hawthorne's seclusion deepened into something akin to haunting. She rarely emerged from her chambers, where the air grew thick with the scent of camphor and unspoken dread. Her diaries, volumes bound in faded leather, swelled with entries that blurred the line between observation and omen, descriptions of dreams where twisted roots snaked through the floorboards, pulling at the hems of her gowns. One passage, dated April 12th, confessed a furtive act. She had slipped into the kitchen garden under cover of dusk, plucking leaves that resembled Ilara's forbidden harvest, brewing a weak tisane in secret. It eased her migraines, she noted, but brought nightmares of accusing eyes from the fields. Lydia's silence was complicit, a wife's loyalty to the order that sustained her fragile world. Yet it cracked in letters to her sister in Charleston. Elias speaks of progress, but the land remembers what we cannot. The woman's gift was no accident. It was a judgment we evaded. These missives, tucked away in a locked drawer, would languish undiscovered for generations, their ink a faint bridge to the truths buried beneath decorum. Among the enslaved, Ilara's story evolved in the hush of survival, passed not as open rebellion, but as coded resilience. Silas, his frame more stooped with each passing season, gathered the elders by the river's bend, where the water's murmur drowned their words. There, under the canopy of willows that gave the plantation its name, he recounted the healer's final verse, weaving it into parables that taught without revealing. "The oak's shadow hides the sleep of feverfew," he intoned, his gnarled fingers tracing patterns in the mud, symbols that young ones like Lena committed to memory through songs hummed during the endless picking. These oral archives, fragile against the tide of separation, preserved the essence of the recipe, its power drawn not from mysticism, but from the intimate knowledge of the wild, honed by ancestors who had crossed oceans in chains, yet carried the earth's secrets in their veins. Yet doubt crept in. Attempts to brew partial elixirs faltered, yielding brews that soothed but did not save. A poignant reminder of how the full weave demanded Ilara's irreplaceable touch. The system's cruelty manifested not in spectacle, but in the slow erosion of spirit. Families fractured under Hawthorne's renewed regime, kin sold to settle debts from the outbreak's disruptions, their departures marked by muffled sobs in the pre-dawn dark. Theo, the young hand who had once warned Ilara, vanished one foggy morning, his flight north a spark of defiance that rippled through whispers. In his wake, overseers doubled the quotas, their presence a constant reminder that agency, once glimpsed, must be stamped out. County elites, gathering at quarterly assizes, reinforced this pact. Lawyers and planters like Hawthorne drafted petitions to the State House, framing herbal knowledge as a peril to public health, akin to unrest. "Such practices undermine civilized order," one motion read, buried in ledgers that prioritized crop yields over human lives. Official histories of the era, penned by apologists in Atlanta salons, would later credit Willow Bend's survival to enlightened management, erasing the 500 souls Ilara had anchored to life, their stories reduced to footnotes in plantation tallies. As summer scorched the earth once more, the vanishing of the recipe crystallized into tragedy. Lena, now shouldering her mother's burdens, foraged deeper into the woods, seeking the elusive barks that Ilara had described in riddles. She found echoes, a fern that mimicked the twist, a root with feverfew's bite, but the harmony eluded her, the brew turning bitter and ineffective against a rash of summer fevers. Despair settled like dust on the quarters, where mothers rocked ailing children with empty promises, the healer's absence a wound that festered. Mira, her face lined with unspoken grief, confided in Silas one evening. "She gave us breath, but they took the air from it." Their exchange, overheard by a house servant loyal to the big house, fueled further scrutiny. Rations dwindled, and patrols lingered longer, the silence a weapon sharper than any lash. This erasure extended beyond Willow Bend's borders, a complicity woven into the nation's fabric. Traveling preachers, passing through on circuit rides, heard fragments in roadside tales, but dismissed them as heathen folly, their sermons extolling submission over survival. In the years leading to war, Hawthorne's ledgers swelled with prosperity, the cotton bowls bursting as if to mock the human cost. Lydia's health waned, her final entries a murmur of regret. "What we silenced will not stay buried. The roots grow deeper in the dark." She passed in 1857, her possessions inventoried without scrutiny, the diaries consigned to the attic's dust. Decades later, in the shadowed corners of Georgia's archives, these threads began to surface. A 1902 flood unearthed a sodden journal from a sharecropper's cabin, its pages clinging to Ilara's coded verse amid recipes for cornbread. Historians in the 1940s, sifting post-war claims, noted anomalies in mortality records. Willow Bend's low toll amid regional devastation, prompting quiet investigations that uncovered oral testimonies from descendants. One such account, from Lena's great-grandson, described the brew's loss as the master's final theft, a confession that pierced the veil of forgetting. Osadas from an old well, exhumed in 1968 during roadwork, bore traces of herbal residues, hinting at unrecorded ends for those who guarded secrets too closely. Today, as the land lies fallow under modern subdivisions, Ilara's vanishing recipe stands as a monument to resilience's quiet cost. Descendants, tracing lineages through DNA and faded quilts, reclaim fragments from the soil's testimony, reminders that what was stolen persists in the blood, waiting for the patient unveiling of truths long denied. The pact of silence, once ironclad, crumbles under scrutiny, revealing not just a healer's triumph, but the enduring tragedy of a system that devoured its own light. The summer of 1855 dragged on Willow Bend like an unrelenting fever, the sun baking the red clay into fissures that mirrored the deepening rifts in the plantation's fragile harmony. Cotton bolls swelled under the relentless labor of hands that Ilara's remedy had spared, but the fields whispered of absences. The healer's cabin site now a trampled scar, sown over with indifferent rows of maize. Mira toiled in those very furrows, her back bowed not just by the hoe's weight, but by the invisible burden of guardianship. She had inherited fragments of Ilara's wisdom in stolen moments, verses murmured like prayers. The sassafras root twisted at the equinox, blended with feverfew plucked from shaded hollows. Yet each attempt to brew brought only partial solace, a balm for aches, but no shield against the creeping ills that followed the cholera's wake. In the evenings, as fireflies danced like lost souls, Mira gathered the women by the creek, their voices low against the overseer's distant calls. "She left us the bones of it," Mira would say, her fingers tracing symbols in the damp earth. But the heart beats only in remembering. Hawthorne's vigilance evolved into a suffocating web, his orders filtering through the overseers like poison in the well. He forbade gatherings longer than mealtime, claiming they bred idleness in the recovering hands, but the true intent hung unspoken, to smother any spark of Ilara's influence before it kindled broader flames. One afternoon, as thunder rumbled on the horizon, he summoned Silas to the big house stables, the air thick with the scent of hay and horse sweat. The elder stood unbowed, his eyes meeting the master's with the steady gaze of one who had outlived plagues. "Your woman's tricks end here," Hawthorne said, his voice a controlled thunder. "No more whispers of roots or moons. The land yields to order, not to shadows." Silas nodded, his silence a shield. But as he returned to the quarters, he etched the exchange into a song fragment, one that the young one sang while shelling peas. Lines of endurance veiled in melody, preserving the recipe's ghost against erasure. In the shadowed parlors of neighboring estates, the pact of silence thickened, a conspiracy born of shared fears among the elite. Hawthorne hosted a subdued supper under lantern light, where planters from adjacent counties gathered, their faces etched with the strain of bountiful yields masking human fractures. Over brandy warmed by hearth fires, talk turned to Willow Bend's miracle, framed not as triumph but as peril. "That healer's brew spared my labor force," admitted a wiry neighbor from the eastern ridge. But what if it teaches them to question the doctor's word or ours? Nods rippled around the table, a silent accord sealed in tobacco smoke. Lawyers among them, men versed in the labyrinths of state law, drafted quiet resolutions for the county court, petitions to regulate folk medicines as threats to public order, buried in broader complaints about vagrancy and unrest. These documents, yellowed relics in later archives, reveal the machinery of complicity, how elites like Hawthorne wove safeguards into the system, ensuring that acts of survival remained criminalized, their origins attributed to chance or piety rather than the enslaved's ingenuity. Lydia Hawthorne, confined to her upstairs world, bore witness to this unraveling in fragments that haunted her solitude. Her migraines persisted, a dull throb that no camphor eased, and in delirium she confided in a trusted maid, of all people, the pull of Ilara's shadow. "I tasted the leaves once," she whispered one stormy night, her lace collar damp with perspiration. "It quieted the pain, but opened doors to what we dare not see." The maid, bound by her own chains, carried the confession no further, but it lodged in her like a thorn, surfacing years later in oral tales passed to her descendants. Lydia's diaries, swelling with unchecked fears, chronicled the plantation's subtle decay. Entries on dreams where the fields rose in rebellion, roots entwining the veranda's pillars. She never challenged Elias openly, her role as consort demanding allegiance to the facade, yet her private anguish hinted at the emotional toll, the way forbidden knowledge eroded the illusions of superiority, leaving only the melancholy of complicity. Among the quarters, resilience flickered in quiet acts of defiance, a human drama unfolding against the system's grind. Lena, Mira's daughter, ventured farther into the tree lines at dusk, her satchel a vessel for scavenged hopes. She foraged for the elusive elements Ilara had described, barks from ancient river oaks, ferns that echoed the feverfew's embrace, but the woods, once generous, now seemed guarded, yielding incomplete harvests. One evening, as she knelt by a stream, blending a tentative poultice for a child's cough, Theo's kin approached, their faces gaunt from recent separations. "The master's selling again," one murmured, "to pay for new fences that keep us in tighter." Lena shared her brew, watching it soothe the fever's edge, a small victory that bound them closer. These exchanges formed an underground weave, families trading verses and symbols through knotted cords hidden in clothing, artifacts that would endure the coming upheavals, carrying Ilara's legacy like seeds in wind-swept soil. As autumn harvested the cotton, the recipe's vanishing deepened into a profound ache, its loss a tragedy etched in the daily toll. A harsh ague swept the remote cabins, claiming elders who had survived the cholera only to falter without the full elixir. Mira tended them with what she had, her hands steady but her heart heavy, whispering apologies to the fading forms. "We hold what we can, but they took the rest." Overseers noted the uptick in graves, attributing it to natural weaknesses, their reports feeding Hawthorne's ledgers with omissions that painted a picture of unyielding prosperity. The master's own health wavered that season, a persistent cough that Harlan dismissed as autumn chill, yet whispers in the big house suggested a deeper unrest, perhaps the land's quiet retribution for silenced truths. This era's silences extended to the broader tapestry of the South, where plantations like Willow Bend mirrored a systemic forgetting. Traveling journals from circuit riders, archived in state libraries, mention Willow Bend's low losses in passing, crediting divine favor without probing the human hands that bent fate. Elites in Atlanta's drawing rooms romanticized such estates as bastions of order, their narratives erasing the enslaved's agency to uphold the myth of benevolent rule. Families fractured further, kin dispersed to distant markets, carrying oral fragments that splintered like shattered gourds, verses half-remembered, symbols faded on skin and cloth. Decades would layer dust over these wounds, but the persistence of memory stirred early. In 1860, as war clouds gathered, a freedman from Willowbend's edges unearthed a buried tin near the old cabin site, containing dried leaves etched with Ilara's riddles. He carried it north, to find a talisman amid the chaos, its contents shared in contraband gatherings that seeded post-war testimonies, county tribunal files from the 1870s overlooked in Reconstruction's haste, reference herbal claims in reparation suits, dismissed by clerks beholden to former masters. These glimmers, like Osadas hinted at in well-dredgings, pierced the veil incrementally, underscoring the tragedy. A recipe vanished not by accident but by design, its absence a monument to the resilience that survived in whispers. Yet in the hollows of that Georgia county, descendants would later reclaim these echoes, their digs into soil and archives a defiant unveiling. Ilara's story, woven through loss and endurance, reminds us of the human cost of erasure, the way forbidden gifts illuminate the darkness of a system built on silence, urging a reckoning with truths long buried. The autumn of 1855 settled over Willow Bend with a hush that felt like the drawing of a final curtain, the cotton harvest yielding bountiful rows that masked the hollow ache left by Ilara's fading echo. The bolls burst white against the turning leaves, a deceptive abundance that Hawthorne tallied with mechanical precision, his ledgers swelling as if to compensate for the intangible losses etched in the quarters. Mira lingered longer in the fields now, her gaze fixed on the tree lines, where Ilara had once vanished into the underbrush, foraging for the elusive threads of her knowledge. Attempts to piece together the remedy had grown sporadic, born of desperation, during the cooler nights when chills settled into bones weakened by the year's tolls. Lena, her daughter, joined her in these quiet rituals, the two women kneeling by hidden streams to crush leaves that approximated the feverfew's subtle bite, their whispers a fragile incantation against the encroaching forgetfulness. Hawthorne's regime hardened into an unyielding frost, his suspicions evolving into a pervasive scrutiny that permeated every corner of the estate. He dispatched Harlan more frequently, the doctor now tasked not just with ailments, but with interrogations veiled as checkups, probing survivors of the cholera for details of the brew, his questions laced with the false empathy of a man complicit in erasure. In one such visit to Silas's cabin, Harlan lingered over the elder's scarred hands, noting the steady pulse that Ilara's gift had restored. "Tell me of the roots," he urged softly, his notebook poised like a trap. Silas met his eyes with the unblinking resolve of generations, replying only with a murmured proverb about the land's selective memory. The exchange ended without revelation, but Harlan's report to Hawthorne painted it as evasion, fueling the master's edict. No foraging beyond marked paths, no gatherings after dusk. These restrictions, enforced by overseers whose shadows lengthened with each patrol, severed the last tendrils of communal sharing, isolating the fragments Ilara had sown, like seeds scattered too thin. In the big house, Lydia's withdrawal bordered on spectral, her days spent in dim-lit rooms where sunlight filtered through lace curtains like reluctant confessions. The scent of wilting herbs clung to her sleeves, a secret indulgence she pursued in stolen moments from the garden, plucking sassafras variants under the guise of ornamental tending. Her brews, weak echoes of Ilara's mastery, offered fleeting relief from the shadows that plagued her sleep, visions of twisted roots coiling around the cradle of her unspoken regrets. One entry in her diary, scrawled in a hand trembling with isolation, captured the emotional rift. "Elias builds walls against the past, but I feel it breathing in the walls. The healer's silence accuses us all. a pact we entered without words. She confided fragments to no one, her complicity a quiet tragedy, bound by the decorum that confined her world, even as it crumbled within. Letters to her Charleston kin grew rarer, their content sanitized, yet one, slipped into a family Bible after her passing, hinted at the depth of her turmoil. The plantation thrives on what it devours. Ilara's gift was the first swallow we couldn't digest. The enslaved community's resilience, once a quiet tide, ebbed under this pressure, their stories of the healer morphing into veiled laments sung during the harvest's frenzy. Families like Mira's clung to the oral weave, passing riddles through generations in waiting, the shadow oaks twist under frost, the feverfews embrace in moonlit boils. But separations accelerated, kin auctioned to bolster Hawthorne's coffers, amid rumours of economic strains from the outbreak's hidden costs. Theo's flight had inspired whispers of escape routes etched in the mine's map. Yet fear tempered action. A young mother, brewing a partial elixir for her fevered infant, was caught by an overseer and assigned to the punishing isolation of the washhouse, her efforts dismissed as idle folly. Silas, ever the guardian, adapted by inscribing symbols on barn beams and quilt patches, subtle markers that endured the laundering of time. Carrying the recipe's essence like embers banked against extinction, these acts of persistence, born of faith in the unspoken, underscored the human drama, not grand rebellions, but the daily defiance of memory against oblivion. Elites beyond Willow Bend reinforced the silence with institutional weight, their gatherings in county seats evolving into forums for safeguarding the status quo. Hawthorne, a fixture among them, shared veiled accounts of the incident, framing Ilara's remedies as anomalies best forgotten to prevent emulation. Lawyers drafted clauses in plantation contracts, embedding prohibitions against unauthorized medicinals, documents that wove into state statutes like threads in a noose. Official narratives, circulated in agricultural journals of the day, lauded Willow Bend as a model of recovery through judicious oversight, crediting Hawthorne's quarantines while burying the 500 lives anchored by forbidden wisdom. This denuncia of systemic cruelty revealed itself in the ledger's omissions. Graves unmarked, contributions unacknowledged, a historical amnesia that elites cultivated to preserve their illusions of unchallenged dominion. Communities nearby, bound by shared fears, echoed the hush. Traveling tales of the healer faded into cautionary myths, their truth diluted by the pact that silenced survival stories. As winter loomed, the recipe's vanishing solidified into an irreversible melancholy, its fragments scattering like leaves in the gathering gales. Mira's final attempt came during a harsh ague that felled several elders, her brew a hasty union of recalled elements, easing breaths but failing to mend the deepest fractures. Kneeling by a bedside in the dim quarters, she wept softly, the weight of inheritance crushing. We were given light, and they blew it out one breath at a time. Overseers noted the losses without pity, their patrols ensuring no collective mourning could form. Hawthorne, observing from afar, felt a hollow victory. His estate prospered, yet the land seemed to withhold its full bounty, yields plateauing as if in subtle rebuke. This era's tragedies rippled outward, mirroring the broader silences of a nation teetering toward fracture. Preachers in roadside chapels extolled endurance without agency, their sermons a balm for the complicit. In Atlanta's halls, apologists penned histories that romanticized such plantations, erasing the enslaved's ingenuity to uphold myths of paternal care. Families endured, their bonds a testament to faith's quiet persistence, yet the cost mounted, spirits dimmed, recipes reduced to ghosts. Decades layered over these wounds, but the seeds of revelation took root in unexpected soils. In 1875, during Reconstruction's turbulent claims, a descendant unearthed a quilt from Mira's line, its patterns decoding partial verses of the brew, twisted roots sewn in resilience's thread. Tribunal archives, sifted by persistent advocates, revealed discrepancies in Willow Bend's records, faint echoes of herbal interventions dismissed as folklore. Osadas from a forgotten pit, disturbed in 1890s land surveys, bore residues of sassafras and feverfew, hinting at unrecorded ends for guardians of secrets. These tardy unveilings pierced the veil incrementally, a justice delayed by the machinery of forgetting, reminding us that Ilara's light, though dimmed, flickered in the bloodlines that refused surrender. In the quiet hollows today, as modern eyes turn to the clay's testimony, the vanishing recipe unmasks not just loss, but the enduring tragedy of stolen agency, a call to unearth what systems buried, giving voice to the silenced through the persistent dig of memory. If this story has already gripped you, leave a like. It helps the story of Ilara to reach more people. The winter of 1855 gripped Willow Bend in an iron embrace, the winds howling through the bare branches like mournful choruses from the quarters, carrying the faint, acrid echo of fires banked low against the cold. The cotton fields lay dormant, a vast white shroud under frost that concealed the scars of the year's trials, the shallow graves now hardened earth, the healer's vanished cabin reduced to a memory etched in the minds of those who had known her touch. Mira trudged through the chill mornings, her breath clouding the air as she tended the few hardy greens that survived in the kitchen plots, her thoughts a tangled weave of loss and lingering hope. Ilara's fragments haunted her, the sassafras roots twist, the feverfew's hidden sleep, riddles that danced just beyond full grasp. In the dim light of her cabin, she would crush leaves by candle flame, testing brews on minor ailments, a child's cough, an elder's ache, but the elixirs faltered, their potency diluted like whispers, carried too far on the wind. Hawthorne's oversight had calcified into a relentless machine, his presence a spectre that loomed over every task. His ledgers now a fortress against the intangible threats that Ilara had embodied. He rarely spoke of her directly, but his actions betrayed the unease. Expanded storehouses for purchased medicinals from distant suppliers, their shelves stocked with Harlan's approved tonics that paled against the land's own gifts. The doctor, grown gaunt from his circuit of estates, confided in a rare, unguarded moment to a clerk, overheard and later recounted in faded correspondence, that the healer's methods lingered in his doubts, a shadow over his prescriptions. "We prescribe control," Harlan muttered, "but the earth prescribes life." Yet such reflections stayed buried, complicit in the silence that elites enforced like law. Hawthorne convened with neighbors under the guise of winter planning, their talks in smoke-hazed barns turning to safeguards, shared patrols across property lines, whispers of bounties for reports of errant practices. These pacts, informal yet ironclad, wove a net that caught not just fugitives, but the very essence of resilience, ensuring that forbidden knowledge remained fragmented, its power neutered by isolation. In the big house, Lydia Hawthorne's world contracted further, her chambers a cocoon of lace and lamplight, where the outside world filtered in as distorted shapes through frost-laced windows. The scent of her secret infusions, weak amalgams of garden herbs, mimicking Ilara's brew, clung to the air, a private rebellion against the migraines that clawed deeper with each passing day. Her diaries, now a thick stack bound by trembling hands, chronicled the emotional unraveling, visions of the fields rising in verdant revolt, roots snaking through the parlor floor to claim what was owed. One entry, dated December 18th, captured the melancholy core. "Elias tallies prosperity, but I count the silences. The healer's unspoken verdict on our house. Her recipe fades, and with it, any illusion of mercy in this place." She penned letters less frequently, their seals unbroken by kin, who preferred the veneer of familial harmony. Yet in one, dispatched to a distant aunt, She hinted at the human fracture. The enslaved endure what we inflict, their gifts stolen to shore our walls. God forgive the complicity we call order. Lydia's isolation was a microcosm of the broader tragedy, a woman's quiet witness to the system's devouring heart, her fears unvoiced until death claimed her in the spring thaw, her possessions dispersed without delving into the attic's shadowed truths. Among the quarters, the community's spirit bent but did not break, their gatherings reduced to furtive nods during the midday respite, where Silas passed the oral threads like contraband. He taught the young ones through games of shadow play by the hearth, fingers casting root shapes on the walls to encode the boil under frost, the embrace of hidden ferns. Families like Mira's formed a quiet alliance, sharing labors to shield the vulnerable. Extra rations bartered in the dark, songs laced with Ilara's verses to lull the weary. Yet the weight of erasure pressed inexorably. A harsh winter flux claimed more than the cold alone, the partial remedies offering solace but no salvation, graves multiplying in the frozen ground. Lena, foraging deeper into the woods despite the risks, returned with tales of elusive groves where the sassafras variants had thinned, as if the land itself mourned the healer's absence, withholding its full bounty. It's like she took the secret with her breath. Lena confided to Mira one starless night, their tears freezing on cheeks hollowed by grief. This human drama unfolded in the hush, a testament to persistence amid tragedy, the enslaved not as passive victims, but as bearers of a faith that memory alone could defy the void. The elite's complicity extended like roots through the county's veins, their influence shaping records that would outlast the living. Hawthorne's reports to state overseers glossed the season's tolls, attributing losses to seasonal rigors, while touting yields as evidence of superior stewardship. Lawyers in county seats drafted broader edicts, embedding restrictions on unlicensed remedies into local ordinances, a subtle net that criminalized survival's ingenuity without naming it. Traveling accounts from the era, preserved in yellowed gazettes, praised Willow Bend's resilience as a southern ideal, crediting prayer and providence while omitting the 500 souls Ilara had drawn from death's door. This historical denunciation laid bare the machinery, institutions built to amplify elite voices, silencing the marginalized through a mission, ensuring that acts of agency dissolved into the ether of folk tales. Communities adjacent to Willow Bend echoed the restraint, their own healers retreating into deeper shadows, the pact of forgetting a shared armor against the chaos brewing in distant capitals. As spring stirred faintly in 1856, the recipe's vanishing reached its poignant nadir, a loss woven into the fabric of endurance. Mira's final brew, attempted during a lingering ague, blended all recalled elements under a hesitant moon, yet it failed against the fever's grip on Silas himself, the elder slipping away with a final murmur of the Shadow Oak's guard. His passing marked the end of direct witnesses, the fragments scattering further as families faced renewed sales, kin torn to distant fields where oral chains frayed. Hawthorne observed the thinning quarters with detached satisfaction, his estate a monument to control, yet whispers among house staff hinted at his own nocturnal searches, raids on the woods for echoes of the brew, rebuffed by the land's indifference. The master's cough worsened, untreated by his own system's palliatives, a subtle irony in the silence he had imposed. Decades cloaked Willow Bend in layers of change, the war's fires scorching fields, Reconstruction's promises crumbling into sharecropping's chains, the plantation fragmenting into subdivided lots under modern skies. Yet the seeds of revelation persisted, tardy but unyielding. In 1912, a descendant sifting attic trunks unearthed Lydia's diaries, their pages decoding the big house's complicity through hints of Ilara's shadow. County archives, delved by persistent historians in the 1930s, revealed ledger discrepancies, unexplained recoveries amid regional plagues, prompting oral collections from aging kin who recited riddles passed like heirlooms. Osadas disturbed in a 1950s well-digging bore faint herbal traces. Sassafras mingled with fever-few, evoking unrecorded ends for those who guarded too closely. Tribunal files from the 1880s, overlooked in dusty vaults, surfaced in 2005 digitizations. Faint claims of stolen remedies piercing the veil of official amnesia. Today, in the quiet hollows of that Georgia county, where subdivisions encroach on the old clay, Ilara's story emerges as a beacon amid melancholy, a reminder of memory's quiet war against forgetting. Descendants, armed with DNA threads and faded quilts, reclaim the fragments, their persistence a justice long deferred, honoring the healer whose illegal herb not only saved lives, but illuminated the cruelty of erasure. The recipe may have vanished, but its echo endures in the resilient voices that refuse silence, urging us to unearth what history tried to bury. Subscribe to the channel to discover more forbidden and forgotten stories. Thank you for following the case of Willow Bend Plantation. See you in the next video.